Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for attending this tsunami reception. This, of course, as you know, is the 9th tsunami reception. And this is an event which we started in response to the dreadful events of the 26th of December of 2004. And we've continued it so as to remember those events, but also to respond in a constructive and useful way to assist people who may need support. Today we welcome not just you, the ordinary folk that usually support us, but we have distinguished members who are here today, no less than our High Commissioner, Dr. Tsunami. We also have the pleasure of, on my left, Mr. Eman Guzman, second sec from the Philippines High Commission, or Embassy I should say. On my right is Professor Joshua Castellino. Of course, he's going to be speaking on an opposite subject, namely the question of alternative models for rebuilding broken states. So that's what he will be speaking about shortly. For those who've never been to our tsunami events, this is an opportunity of bringing together members of our Sri Lankan community so that we can forge a unity and a collective sense of identity in a constructive way. But of course to also welcome non-Sri Lankan individuals who have been massively supporting us over the years. So thank you again for attending and supporting us. This year we are supporting, as we did last year, a project which is a fantastic initiative which we are engaging with the Young Lawyers group, among Sri Lankan Law College student people, namely the Sri Lankan Public Library Project. This has been a tremendous thing, and we have raised funds to assist the provision of law books in public libraries. Sri Lanka is an incredible country which has such things as public libraries. But public libraries need books, and they need material, and they need books which are capable of being read by the people. So it's not just English books, but Sinhala books and Tamil books. All the best books of law are now being our aims to provide to public libraries. We've succeeded in, I think, funding something, I don't know the precise number, 6 or 7. But I think there are 15 or 18 districts or something like that, so the project will continue. We began with Jaffna, because this is where it all, for us, was important for us to show our commitment. Firstly, in supporting the Jaffna University Library. And then the symbolic thing about supporting the public library in Jaffna, which of course was burnt. And we have provided books for that library. We have provided books for a library in Batiklo. We have provided books for Batiklo in Ampari, in Anuradhapura, and other places. Now, all of this is about creating unity and also doing something constructive about reconciliation. Now, I'm going to say no more than what I'm just saying. At the end of the talk by Joshua, there will be an auction. That auction the auction will be about this painting. You will all have a souvenir, so you can all take it back with you. There will be some prints which you can also make a bid for. But that is the beautiful painting. And this is a painting, and this is, I think, an example of how we work. The people that have supported this initiative have all offered their services voluntarily. This is art which has no price. This is art of the highest level. It's not a commodity, because the artist himself is here. And this is an artist who has never ever sold a painting, because he has an idea about what art truly is. He gives his art, and he's donated 7 paintings, or is it 8 paintings to us previously. So this is his 8th, I think. The first was a painting by a child with the tsunami itself, right? The first tsunami painting, and then there have been all these. But that is a beautiful painting. And we are also going to have a fantastic auctioneer today, Sayed Mehta, who is the chairman of the Society of Asian Lawyers, and he is going to make sure that that painting is going to be sold to whoever makes the last bid. It's going to be an American auction, which means you don't need to be rich to get that painting. You just need to make the last bid, 5 or 10, and that's yours, ladies and gentlemen, okay? There's a quality of equality, you know. We in Sri Lanka, we are members of the Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, Democratic Socialist Republic, remember? So there's equality running through our veins, okay? So that's there for you to have. Now, first I'm going to ask His Excellency, the High Commissioner, Dr. Chris Nones, just to have a few words, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Decano, for chairing this Tsunami appeal. Harendra Silva, President of the Association of Sri Lankan Lawyers. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure just to say just a few brief words. Firstly, I've been attending these events now for, I think, the last 2 years, and I really must commend the wonderful work that all of you are doing. Firstly, to remember the tsunami, because most people, so many people have forgotten it. I remember being in Sri Lanka during that time and going down together with several relief convoys and having to do free clinics, free medical clinics, but also in helping the people who were actually were suffering enormously from the results of the tsunami. So I think it's wonderful that you're doing this, that you do it year after year, but also that you also raise funds for legal education. And what is particularly important is that you do it throughout the island, addressing all ethnicities, all groups of people throughout, because I think that is very important now that we're 4 years post-conflict. We achieved peace in the country, May 2009, and we're really, I think, all getting together and truly building. We've got a very comprehensive reconciliation and rehabilitation and reconstruction program, and we really are working together to build a truly pluralistic and inclusive society so that everyone can reap the dividends of peace and, of course, of economic growth. So, firstly, let me commend the wonderful work that you all are doing, and also I think it's particularly germane that this year you're actually raising funds for the Filipino cyclone. In addition to that, I must say that I've just returned from Sri Lanka, where we hosted the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Since I took up my tenure in September, there has been, of course, a very strong, negative, sometimes quite vociferous lobby to try and prevent Sri Lanka from hosting the Heads of Government meeting. But I must say that with the unity, with the integrity, with the strength of all those, particularly all the Sri Lankans, and particularly the Sri Lankans living within the diaspora, that we have succeeded in putting up with that extremely negative lobby, many lobby groups, and it was reaffirmed in Perth that we would be the venue for hosting the Heads of Government meeting, and indeed we proceeded with it, and it returned to Asia after something like 25 years. But it was particularly important that Sri Lanka should host it because we were actually one of the 8 founder member nations of the modern Commonwealth, if you go back to the London Declaration of 49. And we have cherished the values of democracy and development. I know we've had many critics about that, but really, if you look back, we achieved universal suffrage 17 years prior to independence. We were the world's first female Prime Minister. And we actually have subscribed to the principles of the Singapore Declaration of 71 and the Harare Declaration of 99, and the principles enshrined in the Commonwealth Charter, which was signed earlier this year. Just brief about the tsunami, we had, about the Chogam. We had a very successful, 3 very successful parallel fora. We had the Youth Forum in Hambantota, which demonstrated our commitment to youth. The People's Forum in Kippa, which saw many, many people from civil society coming together and having very robust dialogue and debate. And we had the Business Forum at the Ceremony Ground, which had over 1,500 delegates from 54 countries. It was the highest number of business delegates ever at a Commonwealth Business Forum. And that's really testimony to the confidence that people do have in Sri Lanka's renaissance, and in the fact that they're all willing to give Sri Lanka that time, the generosity to be able to actually reconcile and rebuild the country. The Chongam itself, the theme was growth with equity, inclusive development. I think that was an extremely important theme, because it was a recognition that whilst we all get together within the Commonwealth, it was also a recognition that there's an enormous disparity, both in scale, in population, but also in financial background, in economics, between different Commonwealth countries. Some of them have a population of just 40,000. The other countries like India have a population of over 1 billion. But the beauty is, and the beauty and the importance of the Commonwealth is that we all get together and assist each other. And that's what I've learned in the last few years, particularly chairing the Board of Governors of the Secretariat in the first year. And then I was subsequently Deputy Chair of the Executive Committee. And what I've realized, dealing with all these Commonwealth High Commissioners and Board of Governors, is that there's truly a depth and breadth of understanding that we're all at different stages of development. And what we need to do is get together. We should not be prescriptive or judgmental. It's all too often easy to be critical. But what is far more difficult is to have the generosity of heart, the graciousness of spirit, to be able to give a country like Sri Lanka, like many other Commonwealth countries which are emerging post-conflict, the time and the space to reconcile. So what we have said to everyone is, give peace a chance. And I think that's a very simple sentence, but it's a very important one. And we were extremely pleased to have not only so many heads of government, so many foreign ministers, but also the world's press. Some of them had been very critical in the past, but the beauty is they actually came. All of them came. Many of them said they wouldn't be allowed visas. They were all given visas. They all came. And they were able to see for themselves the reality of contemporary Sri Lanka. And it is in that spirit, as we take the chair of the Commonwealth, as our President is now the chair of the Commonwealth for the next 2 years, that we will move forward, whilst on the one hand cherishing those fundamental Commonwealth principles and values enshrined in the Commonwealth Charter, at the same time placing paramount importance on the imperative of development, and to ensure that development is inclusive. This is very much in consonance with the Mahinda Chintana, which is to ensure that we have an inclusive development, so rich or poor, from whatever financial background we may be, from whatever education we may have had, that we all get together and we all reap the dividends of economic growth and of peace. So it is in that true Commonwealth spirit that we move forward, and I must say thank you to all of you, particularly those living within the diaspora, for all the assistance you all have provided to ensure that Chogam was a success. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. And I just want to start by also paying really tribute to the victims of the tsunami itself, and to you for keeping the pressure up in keeping this issue in our psyche, and also to our colleague from the Philippines and the difficulties that they are going through, which of course many of you will empathize quite strongly with. I'm going to keep my comments quite short because I remember last year the quality of the food was outstanding, and I was keen to get between you and good Sri Lankan food. My talk, about 20-22 minutes or so, is titled Arising from the Ashes. And it's not, I can assure you, a reference to the prospect of England beating Australia, of which I have no idea. It's rather much more to look at two models for rebuilding states as they emerge. And I welcome what High Commissioner Dr. Nunes said in terms of the importance of reconciliation and moving forward. I'm not strictly going to speak about Sri Lanka because I'm sure there are people here who know much better about it. What I want to speak though about is our two other models, which I think might be relevant and germane at this stage, drawing a little bit from them, talking about South Africa a little bit, and a little about New Zealand, two very different contexts, but both of which I would class as very successful reconciliations that teach us lessons that we ought to think about. Three pragmatic reasons just to start with as to why reconciliation is important, and in many ways this might seem fairly obvious in any case. The first important reason for me is that if you have a reconciliation that is based on the kind of inclusion that High Commissioner Dr. Nunes was talking about, then you are really, it's only then that you can really guarantee the rule of law and democracy and equal human rights for all. So there's a very pragmatic reason really for having any kind of reconciliation process in the aftermath of what has been a major tragedy and many lives have been lost. A second, perhaps equally pragmatic reason is really you can't afford anymore in this global context of competition to not draw on the full extent of the resources you have in your state. So actually, things like racial discrimination, ethnic discrimination, exclusion are costing a state a huge amount in terms of its economic competitiveness. And to leave these communities outside a fold is depriving you as a state of ensuring that the full armory, if you like, of talent that exists in the state can be brought to bear on your economic future. Particularly important in the context of development. And again, I welcome what you said in terms of the need for development, which is central moving forward. But a third reason really is what I would think of as the internal security imperative. In today's context, if you look at what the economist Paul Collier talks about, he talks about a bottom billion. And he essentially says, you know, at the time he wrote this book, The Bottom Billion, which I'd strongly recommend if you haven't seen it, $7.99 on Amazon, I think. It's a really thin book, but very provocatively written. At the time he wrote this book, there were 6 billion people in the world, give or take. It's now 7 billion. But at the time he wrote the book, he made a very important point. And he said, you know, 5 of the world's 6 billion people either live in first world conditions or aspire to it. Now you might think that's quite a high number, and it is. The reason he's talking about 5 of the world's 6 billion people is, of course, he's including the country I come from, India, and China, and he's basically saying, fine, people in India and China don't live in first world, 21st century conditions, but they have a reasonable expectation of what that means, and they can aspire for that for their children. But Collier warns us about the bottom billion. He says, you know, if you live in a 21st century modern democracy, and 5 of the world's 6 billion people do that, and then there's a bottom billion who live in 14th century feudalistic conditions, you have a real problem. And that's the same problem that you'd have if you built a nice glass house in the middle of a slum. You would engage people in a process of exclusion where they felt they had nothing at stake. And they would then engage in the politics of desperation. And that politics of desperation can seriously undermine the way in which states operate and can seriously create a security risk for everyone. So 3 fairly pragmatic and perhaps pretty obvious points really as to why reconciliation is important. I want to just speak briefly about South Africa and then about New Zealand. And I want to, in the context of each, briefly identify the causes, briefly identify the consequences, and say a little bit about the reconciliation process, really with the view to giving you 4 or 5 points then of key elements to use in the context of measuring how effective reconciliation processes can be and how effective they can be in rebuilding arising from the ashes, as I put it before. So if you look at the South African context, again, the causes are pretty well known. H.F. Verwoerd and his ideology of apartheid, meaning separate development, and really leading to a pretty gross system by which an individual's origin determined what their aspiration and future could be. And that particular process put in place negotiations